Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Everyone has a favorite part of the Star Wars lore. Some people like the gritty action of Rogue One and the masterful slow burn of Andor. Others are full tilt Mando bros. Then we have the Rebels and Ahsoka mystics, along with the newly arrived High Republic folks, and of course, the mainstream Skywalker saga audience. Now, I like a little of everything. I'm a combo platter type of guy. But there is one part of the fandom I'd like to focus on in this video, and that's because they're about to kind of lose their own stream of content. I'm talking about the Clone Wars Bad Batcher fans, the core of which started watching the Clone Wars a decade ago on the Cartoon Network, and now with the Bad Batch ending, are going to be missing that good old itch for clone-related content. Something that I don't believe the Tales of the Jedi and Tales of the Empire is necessarily going to itch completely. And this is a bigger deal than most people think. I know there's a lot of discussion about Disney being too woke and fans reacting to the content, but that's actually nowhere near as important as the financial situation that Disney and every major streaming service is going through right now. With interest rates increasing, there's just money is not as easy to basically raise as it used to be. So they have to choose these shows very carefully. And a lot of times Disney will choose shows with existing audiences. And it's of my opinion that the demographic that watches the Clone Wars, that were probably children 5 to 15 years earlier, are probably the biggest demographic and the most important audience for Star Wars. I mean, whether George Lucas realized it or not, making a clone army was one of the most brilliant moves he did with the prequels. It could have even potentially saved the entire franchise. Now, in the real world, cloning was all over the news because Dolly the cloned sheep had just been born. We really had no idea what the future was gonna look like. Like, are we all going to have clones working for us? Are we gonna harvest them for organs? That was a movie Ewan McGregor was in called The Island. That was really weird. You know, in the old days, if you were running a business, it was all about getting into the yellow pages. Everyone was in it, and everyone was trying to be seen. We even had some of the first attempts at search engine optimization. Now, the world has changed quite a lot since the last yellow pages were dropped on our doorsteps, but the idea is still the same. If you're a business, if you need a place where people can find you, now it's all about creating your own web domain. And it's not just about .com, .org, or .net anymore. There are tons of professional and easy to remember domain types. Let's say you're an influencer and your business is actually just about you. Well, the .bio domain is perfect and easy to remember. And with our sponsor for today's video, Pork Bun, you can get your .bio domain for under $3. On top of that, you also get Whois privacy, SSL certificates, web and email hosting trials, and much more for free. Click on the description down below for more information and use our code BIOGT, that's all caps, to get a .bio domain name for less than $3. Or you can scan the QR code on screen right now. But it turns out, just like how Boba Fett with that cool armor went from a background character to a fan favorite, the silent clones with their clone armor from Attack of the Clones quickly became a fan favorite as well. And I'm sure once a lot of merch was sold, George Lucas saw an opportunity to cash in. I mean, expand on prequel lore. You know, initially, the Clone Wars was really supposed to fill in the gap between Episode 2 and Episode 3, with a primary focus on Anakin's development from a Padawan learner to a Jedi Knight. And so you have the inclusion of the Ahsoka Tano storyline, where Anakin grows by essentially teaching someone else how to be a Jedi. But ultimately, the clones stole the show. The humanity, the goodness, and loyalty of the clones was something that was extremely endearing to fans. Now, the show featured a lot of your typical war stories, but with a group of men who were so likable, yet at the same time in such a screwed up position, you couldn't help but root for them and empathize with their situation. In a lot of ways, it was easier to have sympathy for these clones than it was to even understand the Jedi. Now, when the 7th season for the Clone Wars was released, initially, we thought this was just Dave Filoni looking for some closure, but eventually it became clear that this was the launching point for more animated shows. And the Bad Batch, who were featured heavily in the first arc of the 7th episode, got their own spin-off show just the year after. This was also a year after COVID, so I'm sure creating an animated TV series is going to be a lot easier than creating content that's live action. And whether the show was always planned or if it was just a fluke that was created because of the pandemic, it did get a lot of positive reception from fans. And surprised, a lot of old Clone Wars TV fans tuned in for The Bad Batch, because a lot of the characters that they grew up watching in the Clone Wars also returned in The Bad Batch, along with some other new characters like Fennec Shand from The Mandalorian, which was also very popular. Well, the main story of The Bad Batch has now been revealed to be connected with Project Necromancer and the rebirth of Emperor Palpatine in the sequels. What interested me a lot more was one of the side plots that was introduced kind of in the second season of The Bad Batch, in the same way The Bad Batch was introduced in the last season of the Clone Wars. Well, actually, it doesn't start with the second season. It starts in the first season when we first see Captain Rex. When we see Captain Rex, it becomes very clear that while he is an ally and friend of The Bad Batch and fighting against the Empire, he's clearly working on his own thing and he has his own agenda, which we find out very quickly is freeing as much of his brothers from Imperial servitude as possible. It's a very natural fit for the clone. It's good to see him doing something like this. And by the second season, it's revealed that Captain Rex has a full-blown clone underground network working for him. And we even get to see them take down an Imperial Gazanti-class cruiser, a scene that really rhymes well with that time Din Djarin and the Night Owls did the same thing with an Imperial Remnant Gazanti-class cruiser. This is an action-packed sequence, and we also got to meet a few new clones like Fireball and Nemec, who, like most late Clone Wars era clones, are heavily decorated and have very unique personalities. It's really not every day that we get to meet new clones, and so I think this was a huge highlight of the episode. It was really cool. We also caught up with Gregor from the Clone Wars and Captain Hauser from the first season. The vibe of this episode had a lot of fans commenting that it reminded them of the Clone Wars and all the shenanigans we saw during that TV show. On top of that, the second season of The Bad Batch also featured a very interesting side arc that showed what life was like for Crosshair, the only clone from The Bad Batch to remain with the Empire. First, we have the Solitary Clone episode where Crosshair links up with Commander Cody and they have to take on a Separatist holdout. We get to basically see veteran clones take on Separatist clones in some of the tightest close-quarter fightings we've seen in Star Wars animation yet. The clones take some heavy casualties, and there's something very dark about this episode. There's no hope and excitement that we sensed all throughout the Clone Wars, especially now that we know that this entire war was a lie. There's something very pointless and gamified about this battle, and it's just heartbreaking to see these clones still fighting and sacrificing. And at the end of the episode, Commander Cody ends up defecting from the Empire. Then we have the episode Outpost, where Crosshair is sent to a base in the middle of nowhere, where clones have been left to essentially die guarding worthless supplies. The bleakness of these two episodes really captures the death of the clone army very well. There's even a side plot with Senator Rio Chuchi, who is trying to fight for the rights of the clones, or at least set up some type of retirement system for them. The entire second season is full of moments like this, where we examine the uncomfortable truth of these slave soldiers' existence. They were grown from the meat grinders, and now the ones who were left and had survived the worst of the Clone Wars were about to get phased out and left behind. I actually think the more clone-focused episodes in The Bad Batch stand out the most. The family dynamics around Omega and The Bad Batch work really well, and the larger connection to Project Necromancer is kind of cool. But the darkness, the seriousness, and the tone of these clone-centric episodes, the weight of what's happening to these men, weighs heavily on the viewers. And if we take a look at the ratings for Season 2 episodes, I'm not surprised to see that my favorite episodes, The Solitary Clone and The Outpost, both do exceptionally well, with 8.8 and 9.1 ratings respectively. The Clone Conspiracy episode did pretty well as well. And if I can figure this out by just searching IMDb, I'm pretty sure the Disney execs, the ones who are running $1 billion company who probably have access to all sorts of analytics, who can tell who's watching from where and for how long, they probably see the same thing I do. And that's these Clone Wars, or these clone-specific episodes are very, very popular. The best part of The Bad Batch are the ones that talk about the original clones and their original struggle. And with the situation increasingly grim for them, thanks to the Imperial Defense Recruitment Act and creation of the TK Troopers, we're almost primed for a clone underground series. It'll feature Captain Rex with trusty Echo by his side, plus you have the kooky Gregor, and then there's Hauser. I mean, you don't create a badass character like Hauser without further plans down the road for him. I mean, look at how amazing his hair looks, even after wearing a helmet all day. And that grizzled chin, I'm like starstruck. They gave a clone captain the ultimate glow up here. The Clone Underground is doing exactly what The Bad Batch did to the Clone Wars. They are an outside entity that gets introduced in the more established show. The Disney higher-ups are looking at the analytics right now and trying to see just how much traction the Clone Underground gets, and I'm hoping it's enough for them. And that's because it's important for me personally to see closure for these clones. They are more deserving of peace and happiness than any other characters in the franchise, in my opinion. Plus, entire generations have already seen the excitement of war through their eyes. We've seen the heroics, the camaraderie. We've seen the clones go through some great hardships, suffering, face challenges, and rise above them. But what we haven't seen as much is the devastation of war, what happens to the broken bodies of these soldiers left behind. We also haven't spoken about the political reality of governments who like to spend a lot of money training and building up armies, but don't have enough resources allocated for those who are wounded or those who survive and need care afterwards. I mean, we saw that one 501st Trooper sitting on the floor in the Kenobi series. How many more homeless Clone Wars veterans are there out there like him? How many people, when seeing that clone trooper, are reminded of people in their own family, in their own town, or if you live in a, city in America, you've seen all the homeless veterans that kind of line the streets who have fallen through the cracks of society. As a firm believer that our stories, our fiction, should speak to unspoken truths, it's about time that Star Wars seriously considers the ethical concerns of the Clone Trooper program. Something that the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch began discussing, but now we need to see that story come to an end. We need closure. Speaking of the end, I know in the third season, a big portion of the Clone Underground was wiped down by the Clone Assassin and a clone attachment led by Commander Wolffe. I don't think that this is the end of the Clone Underground, because my entire theory would be wrong then, but a momentary setback, or perhaps even a reset so that Captain Rex can rebuild into a new show. More importantly, if we take a look at the name of the last episode of The Bad Batch, titled The Cavalry Has Arrived, I think that points directly towards the Clone Underground. The Bad Batch are on their way to rescue Omega, and Echo is back with the crew. He's an important part of the Clone Underground. He's the one who managed to also secure the transport ship for this mission. I believe sometime during the Tantus operation, you are going to see the Cavalry arrive in the form of Captain Rex and more clones from the Clone Underground movement. Because remember, it's not just Omega and that gigantic Zillo beast that are going to be trapped on Mount Tantus. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of more regular clones being tested on that facility as well. They're trying to make more of these clone assassins. And so Captain Rex will be helping the Bad Batch, not only because they are allies, but because once again their goals align. This isn't just about breaking out Omega and the Zillo beast, it's about breaking out as many clones as possible. And maybe Captain Rex will have enough clones to finally create a truly formidable underground movement. There's just so many things pointing to the fact that this will happen. There are way too many beloved clone characters that we still need to talk about, right? I mean, what the hell happened to Commander Cody? What about Wolffe? When do those two join the party? Because clearly Gregor and Wolffe and Rex get a mobile home together later on and try to march off into the sunset together in their golden years. Now, we've talked about the lore reasons why we need to see this show actually become a thing, but then there are the financial reasons, which always are a lot more important. A lot of Star Wars fans, they think that this culture war and woke argument is occupying everything at Disney. Like, this is the thing that Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy are thinking about every night. The truth is, they don't really care about this. I'm sure they understand that there is this cultural clash happening, but Disney does not care at all. I mean, it's actually kind of funny you're seeing all of these complaints in social media. It's almost as if, all of these new media critics who just became media critics in the last 5 years never realized that Hollywood has always been run by very progressive left-wing people. I mean, that's just, certain industries attract certain types of people. That's always been the truth. It's just now that there are these YouTubers who dedicate their entire channel on this. I mean, it's very bizarre. Because the reality is these companies, they don't care that much. They don't care about the liberal values, about the woke things that they're pushing out there. It's always about profit. It always has been. I mean, these are companies the size of small countries, and they are run by ruthlessly ambitious CEOs whose pay usually is in the tens of millions. Eye-watering amounts that would seem unethical and distasteful in almost every other culture. And this pay is determined by the board and the shareholders, but also really the collective brain rot that is Wall Street, who treats these CEOs like franchise QBs. And Disney, well, in the streaming media world, they are massive. They are the oldest and largest in many ways. And so instead of just being another publicly traded company, Disney is very much an institution. You have all sorts of institutional investors, you have different funds, even governments invest into Disney, but you also have a massive amount of individuals, retail investors, many who have invested in the company for many generations. And so forgive me for being a bit blunt here, but Bob Iger does not give a crap about what happens in the next season of Tales of the Empire. Bob Iger does not care if the next Star Wars film is headlined by a man or a woman or a talking slug. Bob Iger is running a company that has the same net worth as the entire GDP of Iran. I actually just got a picture in my head of the Grand Ayatollah calling out a fatwa on Disney because Marvel and Star Wars are more popular than his stupid sermons. Bob Iger originally was the CEO of Disney when he took over Star Wars, but then he took a break and a man named Bob Chapek basically was placed in charge. And look, this guy ran the company into the ground, and that's because he came over from the Walt Disney Parks portion of the company and had no idea how the media industry or streaming works. And yes, streaming is everything right now in this industry. Now, again, luckily, Disney being a massive player in this field, they were able to survive. Not only were they able to survive, their subscription cost for Disney Plus was much lower than the competitors, and so they were able to acquire a huge amount of subscribers, which is really important. I mean, that's why Netflix is still dominating. They were an early mover in this field, and they're just not going to be able to give up that advantage. The problem wasn't Disney's subscriber amount, though. It was the fact that Bob Chapek's team probably greenlit way too many shows. And so Disney in the last few years was burning cash at a very high rate, not only for Star Wars, but also for Marvel, which is really fine until inflation really hit us last year and interest rates started going up. Movie studios borrow a lot of money to make films. And when those interest rates get higher, well, it becomes harder to find loans and it becomes riskier to take those loans. And so you want to make surefire movies that are going to be successful, which is exactly what animated content, especially a show like The Clone Underground, can be. And yes, I am talking about it now like it's a show. I'm trying to manifest it like an orc war machine, you know? When the Clone Wars TV show first came out, it cost Lucasfilm around $1 million per episode. The show was completely not profitable at the time, but Lucas would pour his own money into that show as this was a passion project for him. You see, Lucas is best known for Star Wars and Indiana Jones, but I actually consider him a mediocre director. He is a fantastic creator of worlds and a great storyteller, but more importantly, he's actually a really terrific innovator when it comes to movie and cinematic technology. I'd go as far to say that he has an almost Steve Jobs or Elon Musk-like impact on the movie industry. A lot of the technologies that you and I enjoy were all pioneered by him. He might not have invented them, but he made them either more accessible or more mainstream, and a lot of that was done through ILM. Whether it's the stagecraft setup that ILM created for The Mandalorian or the live models he used in that original Star Wars film, George Lucas has always been pushing the technology forwards. And with the Clone Wars, what George Lucas was doing was self-funding research into improving computer animation. I mean, the Clone Wars is one of the few shows that I've seen where like the animation is constantly changing, not just season to season, but like from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. It is truly just a template for Lucas to continue trying new things. And if you take a look at how terrific The Bad Batch looks, it's really just a result of all that technological development, that trial and error done during the Clone Wars and Rebels as well. As a matter of fact, when the 7th season of the Clone Wars came out, I thought to myself, this art style is so terrific, it's almost a shame that it's gonna die here with the Clone Wars. And of course, Disney knew what they were doing, or Lucasfilm knew what they were doing. They had a bunch of shows that was planned on this style, The Bad Batch and all the Tales stories. And so the point is, the technology for The Bad Batch animation is probably very well established already. Computer animation right now is ridiculously cheap, thanks to both improvements in hardware and software. I mean, you can basically create a character, rig a skeleton to it on your iPhone and start animating. And now thanks to machine learning, upscaling, you even have cloud computing. You don't even need a powerful computer to do all that processing and animation. It's become accessible to everyone. It's cheaper. You don't need to be a massive studio now like ILM. You can just be some kid at home. I mean, you guys have seen all the crazy Star Wars fan films that have been coming out. I mean, some of these things are even better than what Disney makes. Fans know the franchise best. And since the Clone Wars has been around for so long, you have a massive catalog of digital assets, characters, vehicles, and locations that can also be used. So I wouldn't be surprised if The Bad Batch came in well below $1 million per episode. Even though it's 10 years later and you have all that inflation to account for, I think the technology has just made making films so cheap. You are going to, of course, acquire more costs hiring voice actors, but I mean, a lot of the clones are just voiced by one dude, right? And so a season of The Bad Batch should only cost $10 to $20 million, which honestly is a steal, especially when you compare it to live action. For instance, Kenobi cost $90 million for 6 episodes. That's $15 million an episode, or one entire season of The Bad Batch. The Acolyte, which apparently will be visually stunning and feature a lot of practical sets on location, costs $170 million for 8 episodes, or $21.25 million per episode. So with funding increasingly hard to secure, with the financial situation getting, a bit more rockier, I think we were supposed to have some cuts in the interest rates, but with inflation the way it's looking right now, we might not have any rate cuts this year. And so there might not be that many shows planned in the very near future. And with most of Disney's competitors also going through the same problems with being a lot smaller, Disney's in a good position to not have to make that many Star Wars films at all. And so for all of you guys who have hated Star Wars in the last few years, you might actually get what you wanted. And also for fans like me, that might be a good thing, because maybe Disney will actually slow down and start planning things properly now that money is not just being thrown everywhere, and that people actually value money a lot more. I mean, the interest rates used to be higher back in the day when our parents were having a better time. And I think that this is a great time for a show like The Clone Underground to really come out, because it's going to be cheap to make. There's a baked-in audience. We know that maybe the expectations for viewership won't be extremely high like one of the live action shows, but it should be profitable. Well, guys, those are my thoughts. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. See you next time.